Picture this for a second. You're working hundreds of miles away from the nearest coastline. The isolation is absolutely total. The ocean just stretches out in every single direction as far as you can see. And then, suddenly the alarm sounds. Smoke is billowing out of the cargo hold. Now, if you were in a city, you just evacuate the building and call the fire department, right? But out here, you and your crew literally are the fire department. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, and the closest help is days away. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're looking at the extreme, incredibly high-stakes reality of fighting a chemical fire on the open ocean. So let's really dive into this. What actually happens when a floating metal box, packed to the brim with highly reactive and potentially toxic chemicals, catches fire? It is easily one of the most terrifying scenarios any seafarer can face. The tension is immediate. You're standing on a vessel loaded with volatile substances, and if you make even one wrong move, the situation goes from a manageable emergency to a catastrophic loss of life and ship in literally a matter of seconds. So how do these crews even begin to navigate that kind of chaos?
Well, the ultimate lifeline for these crews comes from the International Maritime Organization. They published this document known as the EMS Guide, which stands for the Revised Emergency Response Procedures for Ships Carrying Dangerous Goods. It's a highly technical, absolutely vital manual. You can think of this guide as the magic weapon that dictates exactly how a crew has to respond to fires and chemical spills when there is absolutely no external assistance. It is, quite literally, the textbook for survival at sea.
So here is our pre-voyage briefing for today's Explainer. We're going to cover the reality of a fire on the open ocean, why you absolutely must identify cargo first, the firefighting arsenal, protecting the crew, and finally, what happens when water actually makes things worse.
First up, identify before you act.
You know, human instincts tells us that when we see a fire, we should immediately throw water on it. Just put it out, right? But on a container ship, acting on that instinct can be deadly. When a fire breaks out, the crew's very first rule is to overcome their panic and identify the cargo, because applying the wrong firefighting medium could literally blow up the entire ship. During the utter chaos of that initial outbreak, you have a very narrow window of time. Step 1 is locating the stowage position of the burning cargo using the ship's dangerous goods manifest. Step 2, they check the UN number of that specific cargo. And Step 3, they use that number to consult the correct EMS fire schedule. This whole process has to happen incredibly fast, but it also has to be flawless.
So the whole thing really hinges on this UN number. It's just a simple 4-digit code assigned to all dangerous goods, but it is the key that unlocks the door to survival. Once you have those 4 digits, you can flip straight to the corresponding EMS fire schedule in the guide. That schedule tells you exactly what you're dealing with, how it reacts to heat, and most importantly, exactly what weapons you can safely use to fight it. Moving right along to Section 2, the firefighting arsenal. Once those chemicals are identified and the schedule is pulled, the crew has to actually mount an attack. Now, according to the guidelines, the fundamental aim here is twofold: cool the cargo and suffocate the oxygen. Without heat and oxygen, the fire dies. But the tactical difference is extreme depending on where this fire is located. If it's under deck, your main strategy is suffocation. You shut off the ventilation, completely seal the hatches, and activate a fixed gas system, usually flooding the whole space with carbon dioxide. But you have to be so careful. It takes a long time for a space to cool down. If a firefighter opens a hot hatch too early, the fresh oxygen rushing in will cause a massive flashback, instantly reigniting the fire. Now, if the fire is on deck, the strategy shifts entirely to cooling. You're using dual-purpose nozzles set to spray, applying massive amounts of water from a very safe distance. But here's a really fascinating detail. The guide says to use copious quantities of water. That's not just a vague, poetic suggestion. It's actually a highly specific regulation under SOLAS, which is the Safety of Life at Sea Convention. By definition, it means using a minimum of 4 jets of water. But think about what that means for the ship's master. Pumping endless tons of water onto a ship creates intense stress forces on the hull, so the crew is constantly balancing the need to put out the flames against the very real danger of destroying the ship's stability and just capsizing the whole vessel. It's a terrifying tightrope walk. All right, Section 3, protecting the crew. You have to keep in mind the environment for the people actually fighting this blaze. These firefighters aren't standing out in a wide open street. They're navigating incredibly narrow, pitch-black corridors on a ship that is rolling in the ocean, all while surrounded by toxic, hazardous vapors and gases that are completely invisible.
To even survive this, regulations require some extremely heavy-duty gear to be on board. We are talking standard firefighters' outfits, full chemical protective suits, and SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. Because so many toxic gases are totally odorless and burning cargo produces highly corrosive vapors, an SCBA is absolutely essential just to protect the crew's lungs from being destroyed. But get this, here's an incredibly counterintuitive warning straight from the manual. You're fighting a fire involving chemicals, so obviously you wear a chemical protective suit, right? Well, the guide states very clearly, chemical protective clothing is not resistant to fire or heat. It's designed to protect against specific chemical properties, not flames. So you literally have crew members wearing suits that could just melt if they get too close to the heat source. It completely highlights the extreme vulnerability of the firefighters. They have to fight from a distance because their ultimate armor actually has a fatal flaw.
Which brings us to Section 4, when water makes it worse. So what do you do when your most abundant resource, literally millions of gallons of ocean water all around you, is actually your worst enemy? There are specific classes of dangerous goods where throwing water on them will literally fuel the disaster. Let's look at some of these unique threats. For Class 1 explosives, if the fire reaches the cargo, you only have seconds to minutes before a mass explosion. Smothering it doesn't work. Only instant, massive flooding might stop the temperature rise. For Class 3 flammable liquids, a water jet is incredibly dangerous because the liquid just floats on top of the water, spreading the fire everywhere. And for Class 8 corrosives, the burning cargo produces vapors that are so corrosive they can literally eat right through the safety equipment the crew is wearing. If you look in the MS Guide under Fire Schedule Bravo, which deals with explosives, you'll find this incredibly sobering line. It says, sudden or short-term events may endanger the safety of the ship. It is a really stark reminder that despite all the training, all the heavy gear, and all the strict protocols, the master of the ship has to recognize when the battle is simply lost. Depending on the volume of dangerous goods burning, there comes a point where the only viable option you have left is to just abandon ship.
And then you have Class 4.3 substances. These emit flammable gases the second they come into contact with water. The tactics for this are totally bizarre to a layperson. The guide actually says stay in a well-protected position and literally let the goods burn. It's known as controlled burning. Any contact with water will just intensify the fire and create explosive gas mixtures. So the crew's best option is to just generate a water screen to protect the rest of the ship, step back, and watch the cargo burn itself out completely. Can you even imagine the sheer discipline required to stand on a burning ship and actively choose not to put the fire out?
Finally, Section 5, the aftermath and post-fire protocols.
Let's say the crew actually pulls it off. The flames are gone, the smoke is cleared. But as we move into the chronological end of the emergency, the guide makes it very clear that the danger doesn't just magically disappear once you can't see the fire anymore. The cargo may reignite. This is a massive hidden danger. Heated materials expand, and that heat can cause a chemical reaction, like polymerization, that just silently continues for hours and hours after the flames are out. The pressure inside those packages builds up until they just rupture. So as long as the ship can handle the extra water weight, the crew has to continue cooling the area for hours. They have to set up an efficient patrol and a super vigilant fire watch, because literally at any moment, the nightmare could start all over again. We all totally take global shipping for granted, but the next time you order a product that crosses the ocean, really think about the immense discipline, the courage, and the deep technical knowledge required of the seafarers who bring it to you. Floating on a volatile sea of chemicals, knowing that one single wrong move could trigger a mass explosion, would you have the composure to consult a 4-digit UN number before the absolute worst happens? It really makes you appreciate the extreme logistics holding our modern world together. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.